Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us this evening. This is John McDougall. I am the event coordinator here at Murder by the Book in Houston. And before we get into tonight's event and bring out JT and Rachel, I want to make just a couple quick announcements, let everybody know what's going on with us. First up, hi, everybody out there. I feel like we only did maybe one virtual event in July, just the way that schedules lined up with in-store stuff. So I feel like I haven't done this in forever. We've got a good mix of in-store and virtual stuff coming up here in the next couple of weeks. So when you look at the store's calendar, you'll see things listed as either in-store or in person. In-store or virtual. Tomorrow night, we're going to have Gabino Iglesias in the store to talk about his new book. Saturday at 2 o'clock, we're going to be in-store doing our next round of Murder by the Book recommends. We're not going to be streaming this one this time, but we are going to be recording it so that way we can kind of cut the recommendations into smaller chunks and post those videos. So it'll be a little bit easier for people to watch as they have time if they can't see it. But if you are in town on Saturday, you should definitely come see us at 2 o'clock. And also wanted to mention, since I'm guessing if you were tuning in tonight, you were probably an urban fantasy fan. We are super excited that we're going to have Patricia Briggs back in the store on Wednesday, August 24th. She was one of the authors that we had scheduled in March of 2020 and was one of the first things we had to cancel once COVID started hitting. So we're so excited to be able to have her back to talk about the newest book in the Mercy Thompson series. But tonight, I'm super, super, super excited that I get to chat with Joss Walker, who is JT Ellison, and R.L. Perez. I absolutely love the Jayne Thorne series, and I'm super excited to get to talk to them about it. Last time we talked with JT, she had just released her book, Her Dark Lies, which I also loved, but we haven't actually gotten a chance to chat in depth about this series. So I'm super excited about it. So I'm going to bring them out and get us started. While we're talking tonight, if you have questions for either of them about this series, previous books, any of that stuff, please post those comments in the live chat on YouTube or the comments on Facebook, and I'll relay those as we get to them. But for starters, I'm going to bring out JT Ellison. How are you tonight, JT?
Hi, how are you? I'm good.
Good to see you.
Those bookshelves are looking really great.
Thank you. I was telling Rachel and JT before we went live, I got off early a couple hours today because we have in-store events, so it kind of balances out hours. I was like, I'm going to come home and I'm going to sit on the couch and read. And I came home and I reorganized bookcases for 2 hours. So I might as well have stayed at work. I needed to make some sense out of the to-be-read bookcase that had overflown onto the floor. So I think I've touched every book behind me this afternoon.
Can you come and do mine? Because I mean, I have, it looks so pretty on Instagram, but if you look on the other side of the chair, there's like 4 stacks that tall. I don't know where to put them. I mean, I'm kind of out of room, so I have to have a cull, I think.
Yeah, Matt was like, cull. I was like, I don't know how I can cull any more than I have. And he's like, well, we need more bookcases. I'm like, no, I somehow need fewer books, not more bookcases, but I don't know what to get rid of. So that's where I'm at. Like, there's no more room for bookcases in this house.
It's important. It is a vital, vital part of all of our lives. More bookcases.
So as mentioned, JT is officially also Joss Walker. So Joss Walker is the fantasy pen name for New York Times bestselling thriller author JT Ellison, where she explores her love of the fantasy genre and extraordinary women discovering their power in the world. With Jayne Thorne, CIA librarian, she has created a lighthearted urban fantasy series perfect for lovers of books, libraries, romance, and of course, magic. And our other half of Joss Walker is R.L. Perez. Let me bring Rachel out. How are you tonight, Rachel?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So R.L. Perez is a YA fantasy romance author, perfectionist, anxious, type A worrier, and proud Hufflepuff. She's been writing books since she was old enough to form sloppy, misspelled words and staple pieces of paper together. She's published 3 series, the Timecaster Chronicles, the Nightcaster Chronicles, and the Bloodcaster Chronicles, 3 separate series set in the same world, featuring witches, romance, and time travel. When she's not working on her books, she's either napping, diving into a good book, obsessively watching Netflix, or playing with her 2 kids. She loves chocolate, loud laughter, and alternative rock music. So to get us started tonight, we're here to talk about Master of Shadows, which is the second in the Jayne Thorne CIA Librarian series. JT, do you want to give us kind of the elevator pitch for the series?
Sure. So Jayne Thorne, CIA librarian. Jayne is an archival librarian who works for the Vanderbilt archives in the first book. She touches a grimoire and something terrible happens. She starts seeing green stars and is thrown into a different world. And when she comes back to herself, there is a man from the CIA standing in her vault asking her to join them to combat magical terrorism. And she, of course, is a fantasy lover and is somewhat thrilled to find out that magic is real. It's kind of what we all want, right? Is to find out that magic is real. So in this book, the first book, she learns a lot about magic. She works her job at the CIA. She goes undercover in Dublin at Trinity Library, and crazy things happen. And in this book, it picks up right where Tomb of the Queen leaves off, with her mentor, Ruger, the strange man who showed up in the vault that first day, has gone missing, and they need her to go find him. And that's where we open.
Perfect. So I know, JT, just from knowing you for years, I know that you have always been a big urban fantasy and fantasy reader. So what made you decide that you wanted to jump into the genre as a writer?
I've always wanted to make up my own world and make up my own rules and have an environment that I can control completely. Writing thrillers, writing police procedurals, writing domestic noir, it's all bound by a construct that you can't break out of. I mean, there are just things that happen in the real world that are not, you can't not have them happen. And in a fantasy world, we get stuck. Rachel and I've gotten stuck before, and are like, well, what do we do? I'm like, well, it's magic. We can just magic our way out of it. And it's the greatest thing. I mean, that's something I've always wanted. And I love stories about strong women finding themselves in the world, finding their power. And that's, combine the two, and boom, we have this fun, sassy urban fantasy series.
Yeah. So Rachel, what was it like for you to jump in with the second book in the series, and how did you become involved in the project?
I actually started off as I'm JT's personal assistant too, so that's my day job. Yeah. So that's how we first met. And she found out I was also an author, which I usually mention to clients just to kind of let them know how I know all of the marketing things about publishing that I do. But she was the first who actually went out to get my book and wanted to read it. And so I was, really flattered and touched and a little starstruck. Wow, this big author is reading my book. And then it just so happens that right after that, she was in search of a new co-author, and she was like, hey, can you look up some fantasy authors who might be willing? And I was like, can I throw my own hat in the ring? Is that okay? So luckily she'd read my stuff, and she really liked it. So that was a nice pairing, how that worked. And I had already read Tomb of the Queen because it's right up my alley. I'm a huge avid fantasy reader. And so reading that, I figured it was on my list anyway, and it could help me with marketing her book. And when I read it at the time, I wasn't reading it with author eyes. I was reading it with reader eyes. So I had to go through it a second time after that to kind of have a new perspective, new lenses as I was reading, and kind of get into that world there. But after that, it was, I love immersing myself into worlds. That's why so many of us read and so many of us dive into adventures like that. And so I got to know Jayne and the characters really well, and I feel like they're all just rattling around in my head now. So
Very cool. So one of the things that you guys do in the first book and in this book is we get to know like what Jayne's reading and what some of those like touchstone books are for her. So what are some of those kind of urban fantasy or fantasy touchstone books for you that kind of really helped influence the series? Let's start with Rachel.
Oh goodness, I have to think for a second. Well, I know one that JT is going to mention is A Discovery of Witches, and I am.
You stole it! Come on,
sorry.
That's mine.
Yeah. And I watched the first season too, so visually that show really captures a lot there too. That really stuck with me as far as the Jayne books are concerned because of the similarities. Jayne is a bit lighter, a bit more humorous than Discovery of Witches. But, the whole scholarly aspect, a smart female heroine is there. And I love that. And, of course, the Patricia Briggs series is big, a strong female who can take care of herself and doesn't really need a man, but there's a man there anyway, that kind of thing. So that's helpful too. And, you've got the standard like Lona Andrews, Annette Marie, Kim Harrison. There's a whole segment of just strong female warriors kicking butt and, delivering quippy lines here and there as they do it. And I love that because it's not a damsel in distress. They don't need to be rescued. They do the rescuing. And so we really try to emulate that in the Jayne series.
Yeah.
For sure. Well, Discovery of Witches, absolutely 100,000%. I was telling Rachel, you got to read this, you got to read this, you got to watch it, you're going to love it. It's amazing. Deb Harkness is just brilliant. She's one of 5 professors of alchemy in the whole world. She's coming at her series from a very high level of scholar, which is incredibly fun for me. I read more fantasy, more epic fantasy than urban fantasy, to be perfectly honest. So, I'm big, though now she's moving into urban fantasy. Leigh Bardugo is a huge one for me. Victoria Schwab, Sarah J. Maas, Victoria Aveyard. I love those just complete worlds that are built. And I love taking those elements and putting them in the real world in places that, we've visited. Like for Master of Shadows, Rachel went to Paris. She actually went to Paris and did research, and that's part of why the book comes alive. And that's the fun of urban fantasy, I think, is you get all those high magical elements and you get to marry them with the real world, and that's that's part of what we wanted to do with the series, is travel all over the world.
Awesome. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that's fun about the series is, it's a well-known urban fantasy trope of the heroine who comes into these magic powers but doesn't know anything about magic existing or knowing, and they're learning about these powers as you're also learning about it, which is a great way to build a world because you're discovering at the same time that the characters are. So how do you find the balance of being able to explain the world through the character's eyes who's learning all of this without the character seeming just like completely lost and having no idea what they're doing?
Honestly, I think we do that by making reference to other urban fantasy and fantasy novels because she's such a huge fan that, she can actually look at something and say, well, wait a second, that's not how they did that in that book. What's going on here? Why is this not working for me the way it's working for them? I think that's really fun. Rachel, what do you think?
Well, and I kind of look at this as the rule of thumb for world building, is that you give it to the reader, and in this case, the character, in small doses, because if you do it all at once, the reader's going to be lost. And so, having these really long expositions, is great because, well, we did the research, we did the world building, we want to dish it out to the reader right here, right now. But, you want to give it to the reader in small doses as it's relevant, because they're going to forget all that, and so it's important to take it one step at a time. Easy does it, because it's a big, big world that we introduce there. And it's important to make sure that, every asset is digested with the proper amount of time. So.
And it works really well that Jayne is basically thrown into this so quickly and she has to get up to speed on everything so quick. So it's Here's this emergency. You have to go and you have to rescue this guy. You have 2 days to train, boom, go. I think that works really well too, to be able to kind of help her learn on the fly.
Right. Yeah.
One of the things I also really love about this series, and you did it more with the novella, The Eighth Road, that came out, is we really get to learn about Jayne's family. And I feel like, as I was thinking about questions today and starting to think about a lot of the urban fantasy stuff that I like, a lot of urban fantasy heroines don't have extended biological family. There's a lot of found family and there's a lot of that, but there's not her sister. We find out about her mother and her father, and they're so integral to the story. Was that a conscious decision on y'all's part to have kind of it be more immediate family and not just chosen family?
Yes. Yeah. In the first book, Sophia's in the first book, and she is Jayne's kind of overprotective, hovering second mother. And we find out a little bit about why that is, that, she's had this, but I don't have sisters. And I thought it was going to be really difficult to have that. But Alicia Klepeek, who co-wrote the first book with me, had sisters and said, listen, I think it's really important that we have this because all of these books are found family. It was important to have a person that she had as a touchstone, as somebody that she could rely on, as somebody that she was trying to break free of too, to become her own person, become her own woman. And they are orphans. They've lost their parents. And that creates a different dynamic than if they had actual family. But then we get into the second book and in the Eighth Road, and Rachel's got an extensive sisterhood to draw from. And I'm telling you, without that, I don't think we could make Sophia come to life the way she has. She's become just as important a character in the series as Jayne.
So, Rachel, do you have anything to add about sisters and having that element in them?
Well, because like she mentioned, Sophia was in Tomb of the Queen. So when I stepped in, the whole familial thing was already there. But it just so happened it worked out nicely because I grew up with only sisters. So three sisters. I have three sisters. And I didn't even realize this until I was talking about it with somebody. But all of my books, all of my series, most of them, they're only children. But they only ever have sisters. I don't have any main characters with brothers. And I think that was just a subconscious thing on my part where I'm like, oh, well, yeah, it's obviously a sister because I know how to do that. And I don't know how to do the brother thing. So I was like, I need to make a conscious effort to put a brother somewhere into a series that I'm writing. But it's so foreign to me. But working the dynamic with Sophia and Jayne has been super fun and super relatable for me. And I just love that, and like you guys were saying, it's not done too often. And I think a lot of that is because, these adult fantasy novels are these strong, independent women who have established themselves in their lives away from their families. And that's an important part of adult. But here we're trying to do this new adult where it kind of bridges that gap. And a lot of young adult fantasy relies heavily on the parents or lack thereof. They use that as a trope. And so I think that's an interesting way to help bridge that gap.
Yeah. And I think it raises the stakes too, because of course there are stakes in other urban fantasy where it's chosen family or found family that you're dealing with. But it also, it raises the stakes when, you're trying to do something and all of a sudden, like your sister, who, like you said, is your like one touchstone, is like thrown in the mix and is potentially in danger too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it does up the stakes, and it makes Sophia's a really interesting character, and I'm anxious to get further into the series as she's growing into who she is in all of this as well. She's very important.
Yes.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the mechanics of writing a series together. So how do you guys, like, what is a normal writing process look for you guys? How do you bounce ideas or brainstorm off of each other when you're plotting?
Well, we usually try to plot/brainstorm together. It's different for every set of co-authors, and everybody has to have their own rhythm, which what works and what doesn't work. We had the opportunity to brainstorm in person this year, which was fantastic. We got a lot done, a lot outlined, a lot of plans made, and that was great. So I'm hoping we can continue that in the future. But we brainstorm together, we outline a plot together, we kind of fine tune it as needed. And then usually I start the first rough draft and I just kind of hit the ground running because I'm a big pantser when it comes to writing, like fly by the seat of your pants kind of thing. So I just go where the story takes me, and I usually use the outline as a guide. And I check in with her as I go, ask questions here and there, maybe send her a few tidbits here and there to see if it looks good. And so I do the first draft, and then we go over revisions together, like another brainstorming session, what needs to happen. And it kind of does a back and forth dance after that, where, we each tweak and fine tune, we each revise, we each take chunks out and add chunks in. And then in the end, it becomes this whole new fleshed out idea that has been born of both of our ideas. So
it is. It's really cool when you have the end product and you're away from it for a few months and you go back and you're like, oh, that was really, did I write that?
Yeah.
Who wrote that? That's really good. I mean, and that's, it becomes us. It becomes ours. It's not hers. It's not mine. It's Jayne's. Right. And that's when it's magical and it works really well. We are very combustible in person for sure. I mean, we came out of it was just a couple of day session with, I mean, the entire rest of the series laid out, an entire set of mini-series that we are starting. Rachel just gave me the first draft of the first of the Guardians mini-series. We're actually having she's gave me a draft. I've read it. We're going to sit down on Friday and go through and do tweakies and everything. Though, it needs less tweaking. The more we do this, the less work things need, the more we can interpret what each other are trying to do with the story. It's really cool. It's really fun.
It is. Yeah.
Awesome. And so what was it like to try to do, JT, for the second book, to make sure, since you had, Alicia, you had a different co-writer for the first one, what was it like to make sure that you still had kind of that same tone and the same kind of feel to it for a second book with two different authors?
That was the challenge, right? Because Alicia has a different voice than Rachel does. I mean, I would never in a million years expect them to have the same voice coming into this. Rachel's a very strong writer. I recommend everybody go read her other solo work because they're great. I mean, there's a reason why she's doing this with me. I was really excited to pull her into this because I knew she was a good match for the tone, for the snark, for the sass. I was probably a little more involved on, editorially on just tweaking, the way she says things just to make sure that we matched. But I don't think that's really it wasn't really a big deal. I feel like the character is so strong that she has kind of become her own person and things, things sound right. It was interesting. I didn't know how that was going to work out, but it worked out great.
And it's definitely a transition for me because I've only written YA fantasy before now, and so there were times where JT was like, she's a little angsty or a little whiny here, and I'm like, oh, sorry, I'm in like teenager mode, like still writing that way. And so it was a bit of a transition with more maturity, which is great because that's kind of the transition I'm making in my own writing anyway, and so I needed to make that shift, and so it was a bit of an adjustment, but it was good.
That is funny. I forgot about that. I'm like, my God, they're just sitting around whining. Come on. Go eat some crepes. That is the interesting thing about moving from young adult to new adult to adult is these books are PG-13. I mean, we're not, a lot of the urban fantasy novels are heavy, spicy, sexy.
Right.
And these are not. And that's on purpose. Really wanted something that the sex wasn't the focus of the books. And that's part of urban fantasy anyway, is the relationship is much secondary to what's going on. So that was something that we, really focused on making sure was there or not there.
Yeah. So since clearly, Jayne she's a fantasy book loving librarian who discovers that she has superpowers. You guys are both fantasy reading book lovers. So how much of Jayne is like basically like wish fulfillment for y'all? Like, is she just like, you know what I mean?
Yes. Oh my gosh. Yes. No, well, there were times where I was like, all right, JT, I want to put a really obscure reference in here. Are you sure I can do that? She's like, throw it in, just do it. And I'm like, okay. And so sometimes I would write the dialogue and I'm like, I feel like I'm just sitting around with my sisters speaking in our own weird movie quote language, like those random obscure quotes that nobody else outside of your family could possibly identify. And I was like, I'm just throwing it in. Let's see what happens. And it works. And I can't do that in my own stuff because it would weird people out. They'd be like, what the crap is this? But this is the perfect avenue for that.
Yeah. And there is a scene in this that I laughed because I knew it was you in doing the research and I could hear your voice. She's going through one of the palaces. I forget which one, but she's in this massive library and she's just kind of like running after this person, but looking at the books going, why can't I stop? I can't believe I can't stop and look at this. This huge magical battle, but she wants to just kind of take a pause and go look at the shelves. I just thought that was funny.
Yes.
So speaking of research, because it is a fantasy world, so I'm sure the research, especially for you, JT, is going to be different than the research that you would need to do for like a police procedural or a thriller. And we mentioned that Rachel got to go to Paris to do some research. So can you guys talk about just the research process for something like this?
Yeah. You go ahead, JT.
A lot of it's, teaching a little bit of the CIA. So the CIA and the thriller stuff, I sent Rachel a bunch of books on that, just so she could familiarize herself with how some of that works. And then there's a lot of witch and wizard stuff. I mean, I think I sent you, a pretty big stack of, books on Wicca, books on, the magics, the dark magics. One of the things, though, that we get to do together, and it's something that we're getting ready, is the more Jayne gets into this world, the more magic unfolds and the more she is able to do. And some of the older people, some of the adults around her who haven't been able to do magic in a very long time are starting to get their magic back. And so we're getting ready to dive into the battle magic. And I'm really excited about that because it's getting bigger. And, you got to think about how do you world build into this? But magic that used to exist no longer exists, and we have to bring it back. So that's something that I'm looking forward to because I think it's really fun to do. And we just make that up, and we make it up, right?
Right. That's why I love fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
Make it up.
Exactly.
Yeah, like she mentioned, it's definitely a leap for me because I went from like completely creating my own world and problems to the CIA, almost like thriller mystery aspect of it, and I had to brush up on my Alias knowledge with that TV show. So and that's totally new territory for me, but that's where she's like, I got this, I've done tons of research about this. This is my field. And so sometimes when I'm writing, I'll just put like in parentheses, JT, can you check this for CIA stuff? Like I need to know I did this part right. But as far as other research goes, like, yes, I went to Paris and that was fantastic. That worked out so nicely because my husband and I were planning on going to Europe for our 10-year anniversary anyway. And it was perfect. It was so perfect that we got to see so many things and that I got to do this research trip. I never get to do that. And so, yes, that really helped to immerse me in the world. And sometimes I'll go onto Google Maps and I'll drive that little person in the live view thing. And I'll be like, yes, okay, I remember this street. And, just to kind of jog my memory. So that's been really, really cool to be able to do that. But on the other hand, like she was talking about the more complicated magics, and honestly, my best method of research is to jump into other fantasy worlds, see what other people are doing, kind of sniff around and get my own ideas from that. Like I just finished Trisha Levenseller's Blade of Secrets. I loved it. I will read everything she puts out. I love her writing. And it's all about enchanted swords. The main character is a bladesmith, and whenever she forges these blades, she can add magic to them. And every sword is different. Like some of them can, slice out an opponent from like miles away, and some of them can like take away an opponent's oxygen or something like that. And one of them is like a boomerang that it's a spear that you can fling around and it'll come right back to you every time. And I'm like, that is cool. And I'm like, I wonder if we could implement like enchanted weapons into this, because that would be, super legit. I think that would be the coolest ever. And so a lot of the times I get my inspiration from reading other stuff. And, of course we mold it into our own way and we shape it into the Jayne universe. So it's not directly stealing. It's more like an inspiration from a different, similar to A Discovery of Witches, how we took a lot of inspiration from that too.
Yeah. I just finished recently. I picked up Trisha's Daughter of the Pirate King when I was at Target. I was like, this is like so up my alley. So I loved it, and I'm excited for the sequel and to discover more of her stuff too, because I love those too. So much fun. Yeah, we went to Target or something, and my husband was like, "You're buying books?" I'm like, "Yes, I want to read this." Like, "You're buying books at Target."
You work in a bookstore. What are you doing? That's funny. But you come across things. That's really fun.
Yeah. So JT, do you approach writing these differently than you approach writing your thrillers, or is there enough of that kind of CIA thriller element in it that it still kind of seems like the same process?
I do approach it differently because I have a partner, and that's, it's very much a collaborative environment that we're working within, right? Rachel came in on the second book, but it's hers. It's hers. Master of Shadows is hers. Eighth Road is hers. This world is now ours. And, when we sit down to do something, neither one of us are big plotters, so we have to plot. We have to have some plot. And I think that's the biggest challenge to working with a partner, because I'm a pantser too. I don't think that we approach these books the way I approach my solos. I mean, I sit down, I do my 40 scenes and I lay out, I see this, I see this, I see this. For this, it's more, okay, here's the goal. Here's what we have to do with this. Here's the totem that we're going after. It's very subtle and it's very hard to see on this. Yeah, I can't really see it, but if you look at the book, you can see that she actually has a totem now tattooed on her forehead.
It's glowing.
And that, so it's a glowing rune, basically. That is going to be emerging more as the character grows. And so it's, we certainly have to set up, what are we looking for? Who are we going after? Where is it going to happen? It's a little more structured actually than I think either one of us do with our solo work, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, absolutely. And, so the world evolves and, we got together, we were just planning on plotting book 3. And then out of nowhere, we get these like insane ideas for plot twists for like the last book and like some spin-off stuff. And it just like, once you're fully immersed, it really does come to life. It's very cool.
It is. It's really cool. Yeah. We've got a lot to write.
Very exciting things coming.
Very exciting things coming.
So when I was doing your bio, Rachel, we talked about how you have your previous series are kind of groups of kind of trilogies that are all sort of set in the same world. Can you tell everybody a little bit about that world?
Yeah, so it's an urban fantasy world. And when I started writing it, my thought was, if one thing exists, then everything should exist. So the first world is witches and demons. And, I've got some vampires and werewolves mentioned throughout. And I was like, well, then everything is fair game. You can't have vampires in the story and they're like, oh, werewolves don't exist. And I'm like, well, why not? You do, So I wanted everything to be possible because then I could branch out and do whatever I wanted. I could have a series focused on a werewolf pack if I wanted to later on. So I wasn't quite brave enough to do a really long series, because those were my first published novels and already it was ambitious to do a trilogy instead of starting with standalones. And so I like the idea of a complete cohesive trilogy set. And especially if it's from one POV, if it's from one narrator, it's hard for me to throw in more things with each successive novel, especially in YA when they're growing so much and, you have to expect so much of those young protagonists. Yeah. So the first series is what I did the most research on. And my husband helped with that because he's Cuban. And I asked him, because he's a big history buff, I was like, I want to do a time travel romance, but I don't want it to be Europe because everybody does Europe. And so I asked him, when and where should she go? And he immediately said, Cuba and the Spanish-American War. And I was like, all right, because it's one of those lesser known wars that we talk about in history. And so researching that was so much fun. I got a lot of help from my husband and, his dad even read the manuscript because I was like, I've never been to Cuba before. So can you read through this? And so it was really, really cool. And so that one is a witch and her romance is with a half demon. And then in the second series, it's a spinoff about their children. And that one is the one that JT is more familiar with. And she is a witch and she falls for a vampire. It's very slow burn, very enemies to lovers. I love it. It's a gradual buildup and with that tension where they want to kill each other, but you're just like, yeah, get closer together, that kind of thing. And then the third one is set in the same world, not too many crossover characters. So they can all be enjoyed standalone. But the third one is about an assassin who falls for her mark. I really wanted like a kick butt female and a cinnamon roll guy because I feel like it's usually the opposite. Like, the innocent female falls for the bad boy. And I'm like, no, she's a bad girl and she knows it. She's morally gray. She's there to kill him. And she just falls for his gooiness, So. And
now you see why I wanted to write with her. Right? I mean, oh my God, the brain, the depth of imagination here is so awesome.
And I'm sure it's going to help too, like she said, like I love when things are not necessarily a series, but they kind of take place in like the same world. So that seems like that's also going to come in handy as you mentioned doing some spin-offs and some other stuff too. So it's kind of exciting that you're going to have your own like big Jayne verse.
Yes, yeah. That is so exciting. We love it. We have to keep this, extensive world Bible to make sure we keep track of every little thing, because we're like, if this is going to expand this much, we've got to keep track of it.
Yeah. That's probably the trickiest thing, to be honest, is, okay, wait a second. When did that happen? And what happened when that happened? And wait a second, her mother, because I think I sent you a thing this week and went, wait a second. When did magic turn off again?
Yeah. Where's our timeline? Yes.
Where's our timeline? I lost the timeline. I mean, those are the things that, when you're building a series, when you're building a Jayne verse, a Cosmere like this, you have to stay on top of that stuff, because it's very easy to forget. And that's just longevity of series in general. I have Bibles of my longer series as well. A lot of words.
So what is it like diving back into a series? Because a lot of the stuff that you've done lately have been kind of more standalone novels. So what was it like to kind of dive back into that series world for you?
It's interesting because I started this when I was still doing series, right? I conceptualized this back in 2016.
Oh, wow.
Oh, yeah. And it was supposed to be a non-magical series. It was supposed to be like an actual thriller series, just something a little bit lighter, kind of Gilmore Girls meets Homeland. And my agent at the time, wasn't super thrilled with the idea. And so it kind of got backburnered. And then I met Alicia and I was like, oh, wait a second. I think maybe it needs to be magical. What if we do magic Homeland meets Gilmore Girls? And that's what kind of clicked it all together. So I was still actually writing series at the time that I came up with this. But it's like comfort food, right? It's like going home, putting on a pair of sweatpants and having mashed potatoes for dinner. The world's there. Our world is changing. Our world is changing quite a bit. And we're in a really interesting moment, second book as it's ending, we're seeing, wait a second, this is bigger than what we thought. So that's really exciting to me that we now get to take that and move forward. Standalones are fun. Standalones are great because you can just make those rules up right where you are, and you never have to worry about where it goes, right? It's encapsulated. But the series, I love being able to revisit it and go back and say, okay, here's my world, and I'm comfortable in it. Let's wreck it.
Yes.
Yeah, one of my favorite series like that, and Rachel mentioned them, as the Kim Harrison world, where she set up this world of hollows and then just completely destroys it, and then came back to the series after all these years and then just completely destroys it again. It's so much fun.
What you got to do.
Yeah,
of course.
It's been really great, and I know that urban fantasy hasn't really ever like gone away, but publishing has these trends where when I first started working at Murder by the Book, longer ago than I care to think about, like urban fantasy was like True Blood was still on, and we would have and it was like such a big thing, and then it kind of went away, and you still had like Alona Andrews is still doing it, Patricia Briggs has been doing it the whole time, Kim Harrison kind of took a break and came back in the last couple of years, but it's been so great to see kind of the genre and vampires themselves in the YA world kind of start bubbling back up again.
I love Charlene, and the Suki Stackhouses are just, I mean, those books were so much fun.
Yeah.
So much fun. And that's, it's true. I loved Twilight.
Yeah.
I watched those movies the other day. They're great. I mean, it's bad, but they're great. They're bad, but they're great. I don't know if we're going to have any vampires in this, but vampires are very hot again. Yeah. Which is really interesting. Look at First Kill. Look at Victoria Schwab's TV series based on that story. And I mean, she's taken the trope and turned it around. But I think there's always room in the genre for something new, because these are the monsters that we're fascinated with.
Yeah,
we love vampires. They're sexy and cool somehow. Anne Rice, a huge inspiration from early on of mine, Lestat, all of those books are just Incredible. Rachel, have you read The Mayfair Witches, Anne Rice?
No.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
I'll get on that.
I'm getting you those. Those are amazing.
I will admit I have not read them. I started the first one earlier this year after she died because I realized that I hadn't read them. And I got like 200 pages in, and it was sort of one of those, I forgot how like all-consuming reading Anne Rice can be, because you just get thrown in and it's so dense in a good way. And I was like, I don't have the brain power for dense in a good way to keep going with the story that's not moving as fast as I need it to right now. So I've actually just saw it on the shelf today. I was like, oh, I really need to get back to those, because like I said, I've never read the witch ones. But I'm super excited about the new Vampire Chronicles TV show that's coming.
Yeah, that's going to be amazing. No, those books are wonderful, and it's very interesting to see. This trend has come back. It is very much an indie driven trend, I think, definitely. Right now. It is. There's a certain price point that works really, really well for this, and New York is always a little bit behind what's happening trend wise on there, but I think they're starting to get back into that. There's a huge segment of witches coming out. Last year, this year, a bunch of new witch books.
I also love, speaking of like kind of putting new twists, I also love the twist that you guys do on kind of werewolves and familiars. Like, it's so interesting, like just that. So where did that come from?
The rogues.
Yeah.
So rogues are shifters. They aren't necessarily werewolves. They take a form of what is supposed to help the master that they're bonded with work the best. So they're kind of a symbiotic relationship. They're a symbiotic creature with the master magician. In this particular instance, ours is a wolf, Killian Pine, named for a certain actor whose last name is Pine. Looks a little like him too. Thank you, Alicia. She did that one for me. So Killian is. He also doesn't know that he's a rogue, and that happens in the first book. He's with Jayne, and the next thing he knows, he's a wolf, and he's like, "What is going on here?" The shifter magic is something that's really, really important to this story and how this moves forward and how this magical world is built and the history of it, and the idea that the shifters are second-class citizens to the master magicians. And we have there's certainly a lot to mine there that's going on. And in this book, we have, it opens. It's not a secret. We open with, there is another rogue. And okay, wait a second. There's more than just Killian out there. So this is a lot of this. There's a lot of discovery going on with these books, with this magical world that a lot of people don't know about. In the magical world itself, that they don't even know about these creatures. They don't know how this magic works. They're all kind of bumbling through together and trying to keep the world safe at the same time.
Right. Yeah, we've only just scratched the surface, and that's the really neat thing about creating this world, is that it's impossible to know when you first introduce those shifters just how far into the world it will take us from there, just how in depth that facet of the world building is. When you just throw in shifters, you're like, yeah, cool, shifters. And then when we're plotting book 2 and 3, we're like, but yeah, shifters. Like, there is so much more to this.
So, and JT, so with these books and with some of your own earlier series, you started Two Tales Publishing with the spinoff Willow Haven Press, which is the home for Rachel's books. Can you talk a little bit, the two of you, can you talk a little bit about the process of kind of doing a lot of this on your own versus, like you said, indies driving so much of this before New York has its own? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. It's interesting. And I mentioned that because when we shopped this book, because we shopped the first book in New York, and we got the same response over and over, this is going to kill it at $4.99. So that is something that, I have to listen to, right? The urban fantasy world was blowing up in the indie world. I already had a press of my own that I have for, short stories and, weird things, get rights back, get print rights back to a series and put that out. So I wanted to, if I was going to do it, I was going to do it right. And so the press, this was a perfect place to start doing that and having these books, having the print relationships with the bookstores. You have been a huge ally to us, and we greatly appreciate it. Being able to get them into libraries and really just bring this away from just the $4.99 digital space, out of just the Amazon ecosystem and bring it out into the rest of the world. And that's what we're trying to do with this. And that's, we've got Edelweiss, we've got everything up there so you can order through Ingram and all of that.
Which we appreciate so much. It's so great to be able to find something that you love and actually be able to put it in people's hands too. A lot of times if there's something that we want to read personally, sometimes but we can't get it at the store, that stuff tends to get bumped down on the list because there's always something new coming out. So it's so great to be able to have these and be able to put them in people's hands. So can you talk a little bit about cover process? Rachel talked a little bit about having she mentioned the totem on the head glowing. Can you guys talk about, because the covers are so beautiful for these. Can you talk about that?
They really are. Rachel is actually a designer. So that helps a lot because I don't speak design at all. So when we work with Kim Killian, and she's the one that created the branding with the library and the first book, Tomb of the Queen, this gorgeous thing. And we found the model. Doing covers is really fun. Rachel can talk about this a little bit more, and I want her to because she's again speaks design. But there is something really fun about Kim sending us a link to here's the model, and we have to go through and find the pose and pick the clothes and all of that stuff. And there's a certain model that's on every single urban fantasy book out there from every single author, and we're like, not her. Not her. We want something different. We want something unique. Yeah. The magic. The magic is very important. The typography is hugely important. This cover, gosh, did we have 26 rounds?
Oh my gosh, yeah. It's so much trickier than you think. Yeah.
Rachel, talk about that a little bit because you speak the language better than I do.
Well, yeah, it is really tricky finding that nuance, that groove to create the brand for the series. And like she said, it's the combination of everything. It's the model, it's the coloring, it's the text, and the shimmery light that you add to the text. That's all part of the Jayne Thorne brand. And, getting into book 2, yes, you have a vague template for it, but there was still lots of back and forth. And sometimes we needed to see something to know we didn't want it. Let's try this. Oh, no, don't do that. Let's not do that. And, she mentioned, the girl that's on every cover, and it's mostly just indies. It's usually Face Stock. That's the name of the company who has the stock photos, and literally thousands and thousands and thousands of images with this model in these great fantasy poses. And which is why people use her, because, you cannot find people in the perfect poses that you need for your covers. And she just so happens to have this, modeling company that just has everything you need, from fairies to witches to academy to everything. She's got everything. She's holding a sword in one shot and a gun in another, and a dagger or a cloak, a bow and arrow, everything you can think of. And that's why people use her. What I normally do, which is also what Kim Killian did with this, is you use that girl's body and you do a different head. So you find a different face for it. Yeah. And it looks different. She's got the same pose and the same outfit as the Face Stock model, but then you give her a totally unique face, and it completely changes the image. And now, this is Jayne. That's Jayne's face. She doesn't look like two separate parts. She has become her own brand. She has become her own thing. And it's really neat when you see that happen.
It is really good. Do you feel like the tropes that's what we're doing with the cover, is making sure that the reader knows this trope, this trope, this trope, this trope.
Yes, absolutely. You have to convey reader expectations with a cover, similar to a book description. You know, you want both of them to convey certain tropes. You want to meet those expectations. So when readers take a look at a book cover or a book description, they go in with expectations. You want to make sure you're meeting those. And so, yes, you know, everything from the glowing ball of magic, which, you know, this whole thing says strong female woman. We've even got a little wolf sigil that, you know, hints at wolf and shifter characters to come. And then the colors just scream urban fantasy. We've got a moon, which talks paranormal. So yes, absolutely. It's important to include things like that for tropes.
Yeah. And I love that you meant that you got CIA Librarian on the cover of it too, as the name of the series too, because I mean, it's so easy when people come in, you're like, she's a librarian for the CIA and she finds out magic is real. And people are like, you're either immediately in or you're like, I don't want magic. But if you're in, you're like, yes, please give me that book right now.
Of course, yeah.
It is. It is, you know, Jayne's just fun, right? She's just the chick that you want to hang out with. She's your sister. She's your best friend. She's the goofy, nerdy girl that everybody, you know, can identify with. It helps. That helps.
And I mentioned it's got to help too, doing it kind of through Two Tails Press and doing it kind of indie, being able to kind of do those spinoffs and stuff like that and not have to worry about, you know, potentially like, is the publisher going to drop the series, you know, partway through? So I imagine it's got to be freeing to have a little bit more room to play with that stuff too.
Oh yeah,
it
definitely.
Is. Yeah. It is. I mean, you know, with Rachel, with Willowhaven and with Two Tails, you know, we're in control. We control everything, every aspect of this, from the price to when it goes on sale, to what it looks like, to what the titles are. I mean, everything is under our control. That being a traditional author, Rachel's been indie until thus, indie only. I've been traditional and indie, and it's always lovely to just write a manuscript and hand it to someone and know that 6, 7, 8 months from now it will be in a bookstore, right? And you don't have to do anything, and you don't have to worry about, well, wait a second, my Edelweiss didn't go up. What is wrong? The links are broken. You know, hey, wait a second, why is this not showing? You know, there's a lot of back end work to running a publishing house that is just mind numbing, and it's really detail oriented stuff that, you know, you can get lost for days doing this. I get lost for days and I have to drag myself out. But I can't imagine the publishing houses, they're doing this on epic scale. It's just astounding to me. But the freedom that we have, we've sold the audio rights to Tantor, and they're doing the audiobooks. The audiobooks come out like 6 months or so after, maybe not 6 months, maybe like 4 months after the final manuscript comes out, which is nice because then we can down price the book and, you know, hey, it's on sale, get the audio with it, all of that. But there is a lot of power to being able to control your own prices and decide, you know, when you're going to put something on sale. You're very nimble having an indie press. Do you think,
yeah.
Rach?
Yeah, it is. And, you know, I say this all the time to, like, especially new writers who are debating between traditional and indie, is that there are pros and cons to both. And, you know, you've really got to research and you've got to be aware of what those pros and cons are. And like JT mentioned, you know, having freedom is one of them. And that is one of the biggest appeals of going indie, is that you have freedom of publishing schedule and freedom of the material you use. And like she said, covers and titles, everything. And that is a fabulous reason to go indie. But, you know, one of the tougher things is the reach. You know, you don't quite have as much reach. And that is what is really wonderful about working on this project with JT and with Two Tails, is that she's kind of paving the way for hybrid presses or hybrid authors, you know, that do both sides, that, you know, are technically indie, but they can, you know, reach the methods and the ways that traditional publishing houses reach. And so hopefully this will help to create that path for future indie authors like myself, so that we can follow in these footsteps and go places, you know?
Yeah. All right. So we'll start with JT. What is something that you've read lately that you've loved? It doesn't have to be fantasy. It can be mystery, anything.
Oh my gosh. Well, I just finished Ruth Ware's The It Girl, and it was great. I love a Gothic academic book. That's one of my favorite tropes. Love it, love it, love it. That was really fun. I actually also just finished Victoria Aveyard's 4th Red Queen book, which It's very interesting. I had adored that series, and I read the first 30% of that book and put it down. I don't know what happened. I just kind of lost interest. And that was like before the pandemic. The other day I was flipping through, I think we were talking about Victoria. We were looking at her
Yeah.
Instagram feed about something. And I pulled it back up and I was like, I read 2 paragraphs and I couldn't put it down. So I just finished it and I'm like, oh, I want to go read Realm Breaker right now. But I've got things that I have to do first, So I think it's really funny how you were mentioning about the Mayfair witches. Sometimes the book just isn't there for you, or
Right.
you're not there for the book. But if you come back to it, so I'm bummed that it's over because I really, really enjoyed getting back into that world.
How about you, Rachel?
Oh my gosh, I'm reading so much. Well, I mentioned Trisha Levenseller's Blade of Secrets. I loved that one. I just read The Prison Healer, which was fascinating. I've never read anything like it. It all takes place in a prison. And, that's the entire setting. And it still was like riveting from start to finish. Like it was mind blowing. Like I really loved it. I'm reading book 2 now. The Bridge Kingdom series just had a release, The Inadequate Heir. I loved that one. I listened to that on audio. I finished the Iron Fae series that JT recommended. That was excellent.
Julie Kagawa.
Yes,
Aren't
that
those
was
great?
good. They are so fun. And then I fell in love with, I feel like I'm going to mispronounce her name, so I apologize 1,000 times over. I think it's Tassonia Odette is how you say her name. She's technically indie, but she's killing it. She has this Entangled with Fae series where each book is a fairy tale with Fae. So like Curse of, is it Heart of the Raven Prince and Curse of the Wolf King, I think. Those are the first 2. I read Kiss of the Selkie, which is a Little Mermaid retelling, and oh my gosh, blew my mind. She just came out with A Taste of Poison, which is her Snow White retelling. So love, love, love that series. It's just excellent.
And I would be remiss if we didn't mention that Alicia has a new book out this week as well.
Oh, yes.
Got the second book in her Kingdoms of Lore, King Underworld. Oh, and I can't think of the name of the book, but go look up Alicia Clapique. Her new book is out this week as well.
All right. So last question before we head out then tonight. What is next for you, either as Joss or solo projects? What do you guys have coming up next? How about you, JT?
Oh my gosh. So I have a new standalone coming out in February called It's One of Us. That is the story of a infertile couple who find out that the man's biological son is a murderer. And the problem is she didn't know he had any children, and he's got a bunch. And together, the next Joss, we are working on the very first short story in the miniseries, the Guardian miniseries, and it's The Guardian of Silence, which is going to be out in November, right?
Yep, that's what we're hoping for.
Yes. Well, it's nearly there.
Yeah.
We're going to have our first editorial session on Friday with that. And then Rachel is starting, we've already outlined, and we're starting the next book, which is The Keeper of Flames, which comes out. It'll be spring. We've got it bookmarked for the end of June, but it'll be out before that. Again, the freedom of your own press.
Yeah.
When you're done with the book, when the book's ready, you can publish it. It's like, okay, here we go. I mean, I can publish from my phone. It's really kind of cool to have that. So that's what we're doing. And then Rachel's got a couple of projects of her own.
Yes. Yeah. So I am so excited about this short story series. That is a really cool, a spinoff that, and again, timeline, you have to focus on the timeline because a lot of it will take place way before the first Jayne Thorne book. So that's exciting to dive into. And I don't do short stories often, but I love it. It's like little bite-sized pieces of adventure. And so that's been exciting. I am set to publish Ivy and Bone next month, which is a paranormal Hades and Persephone retelling with witches. And it's a bit on the steamy side. So I kind of compare it to like Kingdom of the Wicked meets A Touch of Darkness. And so really loving that, diving into a world like that has been so much fun. And then on the other side, a more epic fantasy spin is I'm working on a royal fantasy series that's kind of like Guinevere and Lancelot meets the Snow Queen. A bit of fairy tale, a bit of Arthurian legend with some Norse and Celtic mythology thrown in here and there. And so that's been super fun as well. Both very different worlds, but I just love every minute of it.
Awesome. So to recap for anyone who might have joined us late, we have been chatting with Joss Walker, who is R.L. Perez and J.T. Ellison. The newest book in the Jayne Thorne CIA Librarian series, Master of Shadows, just came out over the weekend. If you have not jumped into the series, I would definitely recommend starting with Tomb of the Queen first. We have copies of both of them at Murder by the Book. If you missed any part of our chat, once we are done, Facebook and YouTube will archive it, so you'll be able to rewatch. And while you're there, you'll be able to see all of the other virtual events that we've done. We've been able to chat with JT a couple of times throughout the pandemic, so those are all up there as well. JT and Rachel, thank you so much for letting us chat with you tonight. This has been a blast.
Yes, thank you so much for having us.
It has been. It's so good to see you. Thank you for having us.
My pleasure. You guys take care, and we'll see you soon.
Bye.
Right, take care. Bye.